Towards a Concrete Analysis of the DPRK by a good friend, Zach Drabczyk. The issue of describing the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, is one which has concerned all manner of political organizations for quite some time, a topic of which the non-communist left and a wide variety of would-be political economists have greatly pursued. Here we hope to investigate the class character of the DPRK with a great deal of empirical, objectively atomized, incomprehensive dialectical analysis. While there is plenty of room for thoughtful criticism and discussion surrounding many facets which compose North Korea, the point of the following is not to make such remarks. Discerning the material relationships which compound the class dictatorship of the DPRK deserves a methodology which minimizes the cultural skepticism which so often parallels such attempts. All of history can be summed up to a struggle between classes. The history of Korea, in specific the northern region which was liberated from the Japanese following World War II, is no different. Understanding this history is fundamental to contextualizing the political economy of the DPRK today. Following World War II, Northern Korea began a transformation in line with the Communist-aligned Provisional People's Committee for North Korea. These people's committees, comprised largely of poor peasants, began a mass mobilization against the landed class, especially those formerly sympathetic to the Japanese occupation, expropriating much of their wealth, but also building popular sentiment for the socialist forces in Korea, eventually permeating the nationalization of key industries. The land reform went into law March 1946 and was completed in only 1 month, with over 2 million acres in cultivated land being confiscated and redistributed among the poorer peasants. As observed in previous revolutions, the alliance between the working class and the peasantry was absolutely fundamental to crystallizing the communist forces in the north. 74.1% of the population was composed of peasantry. These undertakings, combined with the imperialist intervention and collaboration with the South, paved the way for the formation of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north, in contrast to the Republic of Korea in the Western-style proxy South. The subsequent antagonisms inevitably led into open conflict are a subject for another time. Important to note, however, is the alliance formed between the working class and peasantry, as well as the progressive elements of the national bourgeois, in particular those strongly aligned against the comprador South, tempered by an anti-imperialist struggle. Because the conflict was never concretely resolved, the method behind the national liberation reunification here from the comprador and imperialist forces never qualitatively changed. The contradiction between the Korean people and the Western oppressors was never resolved, thus still conditions social reality today in the DPRK. Paraphrasing Mao, the principal contradiction transforms along with the necessitating contradictions. Only by understanding this can we understand the positions and policies pursued by the young DPRK, which many would scoff as class collaboration or another leveling of revisionism. Following the Korean War, the DPRK under Kim Il-sung continued to transform the material relationships within society. As mentioned earlier, the working class alliance with the peasantry and the people's committees gave steam behind the process of nationalizing all forms of industry in the North. In 1947, roughly 80.2% of industrial production was under state control, with the share of private enterprises making retail goods only at 43.5%, with private ownership concentrated largely in the petty bourgeois with light industry production. By 1958, that same figure was reduced to 0% as the state aggressively pursued ownership of light industry, effectively neutralizing the petty bourgeois as an economically active class. Paralleling this transformation was the growth of a politically assertive class of rich peasants, drawing similarities with the phenomenon experienced decades earlier in the Soviet Union. Kim Il-sung noted the dangerous capacity of such an emerging class in November 1954. We also cannot close our eyes to the fact that rich farmers are constantly emerging in the countryside. Though they benefited from the agrarian reform, those who are growing into rich farmers are liable to be influenced by South Korean reactionary circles as their farming gradually takes a capitalist character. Inasmuch as rich farmers are emerging in the countryside and they are affected by reactionary influences, the class struggle is continuing in the rural areas anyway, even though it has not yet come out into the open, and it may gradually grow sharper. This contradiction between the affluent farmer and the proletarian dictatorship was to be resolved, as it had in the Soviet Union, thus the process of collectivization. In 1954, the movement towards collectivization in the countryside officially began, and by 1958 had been successfully completed. Now, socialist relations of production began to permeate through all realms of society as the process of socialist construction continued. Look now to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the firm establishment of Sangha politics, a policy the Workers' Party of Korea describes as giving precedence to arms and the military. Despite Western insistence of the novelty of Sangha politics, the official history of the DPRK points to a development of Sangha decades before the DPRK was even formed. This is important to note because it highlights how the anti-imperialist and essentially national liberation struggle has tempered the politics of socialist Korea from the very beginning. Regardless, the collapse of the Soviet Union did bring qualitative changes to the political structure of the DPRK. Notably, the National Defense Commission has become the backbone organ in the state administrative organ, and commands all the work of the politics, military, and economy. This can largely be attributed to the unique position the DPRK assumed following its de facto isolation internationally in the mid-1990s. The fall of the Soviet Union meant deep economic austerity. Moreover, it meant an emboldened U.S. and comprador South. This, combined with the political contradictions between the PRC, meant the DPRK was forced to pursue a deeply militaristic road of development, hence the superiority of the National Defense Commission and, wide assertion, dissemination of Sangha politics. Ultimately, what we see emerge from this 1990s transformation is a unique worker state, conditioned by the intense contradictions between its socialist construction and the ever-present threat of imperialist intervention. Unique not only in its precarious historical predicament, but also in the related development of its internal contradictions, which no doubt assume an intensely dialectical relationship with parallel external contradictions. While endless books could be written on the subjects we have only briefly visited, the object of this analysis requires us to now examine the contemporary structures of the DPRK, in specific the class character, the organs of class power, and the material relationships, especially those to the means of production held by the Korean people. First, we examine the formal class character of the DPRK. Nominally, the nation would be considered a strong worker state. 70% of the nation is comprised of wage laborers working in formal industry and services. In addition, no real material classes exist outside of the proletariat, including those involved in the service sector, and the remaining small farmers who have not been incorporated into the vast network of collective farms. Furthermore, what little remnants of the national bourgeois exist have been enveloped in the cooperative and state-owned enterprises. Despite the seeming emergence of a more privileged subset of cadres in Pyongyang and other urban centers, the DPRK can be found to be concretely proletarian in a dual political existence as well. This material reality is further reflected in the social relationships between the consciousness among the Korean people, which could only be described as immensely devoted to the cause of the Korean self-determination and socialist construction. We will extend upon this further when some constructive criticism and observations are made. Second, we must examine the organs of class power in the DPRK, namely the state organs and their relationship with the broader of the Korean people. Clearly, the state organ of the DPRK exercised supreme authority over the economy and social life. The state constitutionally represents the interests of the working people, and this has largely excluded exploiters and oppressors from formal relations. The social system of the DPRK is a people-centered system under which the working peoples are masters of everything, and everything in society serves the working peoples. The state shall defend and protect the interests of the workers, peasants, and working intellectuals who have been freed from exploitation and oppression and become the masters of state and society. Therefore, the political organs of class power have become proletarian organs of class power, at least in the sense that it is provided constitutionally to the Korean people. The guiding political force in the DPRK remains the Workers' Party of Korea, which holds 601 of the 687 seats in the Supreme People's Assembly, and the de facto leading party in the ruling coalition Democratic Front for the Reunification of the Fatherland. All Koreans over the age of 17, regardless of race, religion, sex, etc., are able and encouraged to participate in the organs of state power. Elections are routinely held for local and central organs of state power, being usually people's assemblies, which comprise the core of the state power in the DPRK, from which come the standing organs of class power being institutionally, the National Defense Commission and the Korean People's Army. As mentioned earlier, the road of Sangam meant material developments in the social realities which comprise what we consider the North Korea. The large emphasis on military advancement and might has only assisted the imperialist detractors in their description of the DPRK as a military dictatorship, among other inarticulate slander, not realizing it is really which forms theory, not theory which forms reality, most certainly in the case of the DPRK. With this policy of military first has come the qualitative change or creative application, as it were, of Marxism-Leninism, in particular the basis of class power, which is no doubt physically materialized in the awesome might of the Korean People's Army. It is considered the highest honor for the Korean to serve his or her fatherland in the struggle against imperialism by joining the Korean People's Army. Unlike other standing military forces, the KPA is definitely involved in the social and as well as material construction of socialism in the north of Korea. Understanding this helps us understand how the unique internal developments of the socialist Korea created equality and a unique expression of class power. Apart from the KPA, the Korean people are linked to their respective institutions of class power through direct legal means, and of course the cadres. According to Kim Il-sung, the cadres decide everything, much in the spirit of Stalin's commentary on political power in the Soviet Union. The party cadres are an inescapable feature of North Korean political apparatus, and are therefore possibly the closest link the Korean people have to their formal organs of power. Cadres, as well as party officials and administrators, are known to visit workplaces and provide motivation as well as guidance to the working people. So pinnacle are the cadres that some argue their relative privilege constitutes the growth of a new class, the rulers in the DPRK, something which I will touch upon soon. With all this said, it is decidedly difficult to imagine the organs of class power to be serving anything other than, at least nominally, the working peoples of North Korea. Thirdly, we must analyze the material relationships in socialist Korea, specifically those relationships of production. The most available data shows that state ownership comprises over 91% of the entire North Korean economy. While limited forms of liberalization have been experienced, most of the state-owned economy, essentially planning, constitute a part thereof that planning. It can thus be said that, at least very theoretically, that the means of production are socially owned and operated. To quote again the Constitution of the DPRK, "The property of the state belongs to the entire people. There is no limit to the property which the state can own. Only the state possesses all the natural resources, railways, airports, transportation, communication organs, and major factories, enterprises, ports, and banks. The state shall guarantee giving priority to the growth of its property, which plays a leading role in the development of the national economy." This understanding of property in regard to the social ownership is by no means differentiated from the orthodox understanding of Marxism-Leninism, and in particular the transition stage that is socialism, to quote Enver Hoxha, rather ironically, in his criticism of Yugoslav revisionist self-administration. The theory and practice of Yugoslav self-administration is an outright denial of the teachings of Marxism-Leninism. The essence of self-administration socialism in the economy is the idea that allegedly socialism cannot be built by concentrating the means of production in the hands of the socialist state by creating state ownership, but by fragmenting the socialist state property into the property of individual groups of workers. And unlike the revisionists in the Communist Party of China, the DPRK is not on the capitalist road of imperialist capitulation, or even to that of the national bourgeois. The state-owned industries are operated on behalf of the Korean people and managed usually by a small committee of selected managers, workers, and party functionaries in a method termed the Tan working system. This application varies greatly from the revisionist trend in the private ownership and often management and operations. Overall, the DPRK has resisted many revisionist trends in economic policy, functionally preserving the socialist relations of production to the best possible in a given politically normative discretion. However, there have been many notable concessions made in the formation of special economic zones, such as the Kaesong Industrial Complex, as well as the incorporation of an independent account system and other reforms which were likely patterned after the Soviet experience. Regardless, when being understood objectively and in relationship with the constant development of the ownership and the operation of the means of production, seems to indicate a profoundly socialist character found in the context of a worker state. And with all this acknowledged, I would like to make further elaborations on the collection of notes made above, in particular that space made for constructive and comradely criticism. In an entirely practical sense, solidarity with the self-determined Korean people must be pursued in respect to proletarian internationalism. In real application of dialectics, no criticism, no matter its character, is made in a vacuum. All of our words can fit into either a narrative of respective to material struggle between the self-determined Korean people and the forces of imperialism. This fundamental understanding cannot be ignored when making criticisms of the DPRK. Furthermore, there's a fine line between self-important, implicitly chauvinistic first-world criticisms of established socialism and constructive criticism in line with Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, coming from cadres of the imperialist centers or elsewhere. Equally so, there's a fine line between correctly observing the limitations of criticism divorced from the material experience and limiting constructive criticism and discussion on the basis of social essentialism applied to vulgar conceptions of actually existing socialism. And I have no doubt that these two contradictions are intimately related. So much of the criticism made is A. non-constructive, vulgar, and rather anti-socialist. B. equally vulgar, stemming from trends of ultra-leftism, or C. thoroughly dogmatist. While the first two forms fall almost equally from the right and left camps, the third form is a phenomenon found exclusively in the circles of ardent Marxist-Leninists. With respect to those criticisms coming from the established Marxist-Leninists, it's equally important to understand Marxism is above all a method in regard to revolutionary science, a set of principles that can be understood and applied universally, not dogma or a specific blueprint to communism. Now that I have set the record straight on my own framework for constructive criticism, allow me to make said criticisms. Upon observation, I feel first and foremost all shortcomings and revisionist trends found within the scope of socialist Korea can be attributed to the context of a creative break rather than a creative application of Marxism-Leninism. The Workers' Party of Korea seemingly stagnates in pattern with political lines of the Soviet Union, failing to ideologically develop and correct, read, and perhaps self-criticize, notably first on the issue of cadres which Kim Il-sung parroted with the Soviet dogmatists unto which Mao would criticize. They walk on one leg. We walk on two. They believe that technology decides everything, that cadres decide everything, speaking only of expert, never of red, only of the cadres, never of the masses. They speak only of the production relations, not of the superstructure nor politics, nor the role of the people. Communism cannot be reached unless there is a communist movement. This is only one specific example. Many others exist which follow the same broken trend. In many ways, Juche became the soft break with the science of Marxism-Leninism, the artistic expression of political complacency. True as it is, the contradictions which produce what we now know as Juche and tactically Sangan politics were external and primary of a principal character. The contradictions which now impede the socialist constructions were internally exacerbated through rightist mishandling, placing external cause and effect punchlines. Where analysis of internal contradictions should be is patently anti-dialectics and a signature of vulgar bourgeois philosophy. And there's talk of a mass line, but where is it being applied and how is it developing? Qualitative evidence seemingly does not exist, and certainly not at the institutional level of instruction. Instead, we observe symptoms of the city-countryside contradiction now materializing in the form of cadre privilege, such as that not only mentioned by Mao, but also in precedent by Stalin. This bureaucratism, combined with the commandist tendencies found in relation to the KPA, pose a threat to the socialist road of the Korean people. In addition, there is an issue of actually applying democratic centralism, at least relatively so in respect to the given conditions. There is no real available evidence of free criticism, self-criticism, and or discussion. And while this does not necessitate the lack thereof, which must be met with some degree of uncertainty, it does not mean that these principles are not being honestly propagated. This is no doubt related to the conversation regarding the cult of personality around the Kim family. While accusations of some quasi-monarchy or feudalism outrageously baseless and unscientific, the rather ridiculously uncritical acceptance of Kim Il-sungism, Kim Jong-ilism, as termed by the Workers' Party of Korea, illustrates a concerning degree of hero worship. Indeed, we should hold high those brilliant theoreticians, revolutionaries, and leaders who have shown truth in their practice. And that is the line between correct praise and what can be considered a personality cult. Correct Marxist-Leninists will criticize the failures of Marx, Lenin, Stalin, etc. Correct Maoists will criticize the aforementioned, including Mao. It seems only Jucheists are fearful to criticize Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un. This fear of criticism highlights the failure to correctly apply Marxism-Leninism, but also reflects what may be quite insecurity in the universal truth value of the Juche ideology. Then comes the orthodox and predictably yet valid criticisms of Juche, not as the supposed Jucheists describe it, but as the theorists of Juche describe it. The Juche philosophy is an original philosophy which has been evolved and systematized with its own principles. The historic contribution made by the Juche philosophy to the development of philosophical thought lies not in its advancement of Marxist-Leninist materialist dialectics, but in its clarification of new philosophical principles centered on man. I will not spend any time formally criticizing Juche. In fact, I will defer to a great piece on the issue by Gary Howell. I will instead draw light to the strategic abstractness assumed by Juche and his theorists. Although Juche is posited as a solution to the theoretical limitations of Marxism-Leninism on the Korean Peninsula, there is no effort to actually indicate these supposed limitations. Juche seemingly authenticates its own existence as original philosophy on the preclusion that it is Juche. This is where many formal contention resides. Correct theory presumes a real relationship with correct practice, and incorrect theory can only continually reproduce such incorrectness. These are not only criticisms, the only criticisms to be made. One which continually and rightfully surfaces in left circles considers the masculinity presented by the DPRK as wholly reproductive of patriarchal norms. There is definitely some truth to this criticism, yet the Workers' Party of Korea and the DPRK proper seem to continually make efforts to combat this explicit dogma, especially in the KPA. As mentioned earlier, the objective for this piece was to concretely describe the relationships and conditions which compose socialist Korea. Therefore, detailed criticism must be left as complements to the primary task. Allow us to conclude with the realization, more than anything, we have to understand the DPRK as a whole, in contradiction with the imperialism of the world and the set of internal contradictions itself, continually attempting to break down the DPRK into its composing pieces, as do so many political economists, without an eye towards the intrinsic motion between the parts, will always fail to adequately address the task. It is for this reason we uphold the anti-imperialism of the DPRK and its primarily socialist character. While there is certainly space for the forces of reaction and right opportunism to influence the organs of class power, the resoluteness of the Korean people will stand steadfast in socialism, such as they have in a deadly struggle against the compradors and imperialists. If we must err, we should err on the side of socialism, on the side of the self-determined Korean people, on the side against imperialism and the comprador South. Err with the oppressed and exploited against their oppressors, and against the exploiters around the world. Thank you for watching. Go ahead, rate, comment, subscribe, share on various social media, and if you want, there's some other great content here you could check out.